The HOA tried to steal my father's private pond and turn it into a luxury dog park, so I buried their entire project under 4 feet of concrete while the ribbon-cutting chairs were still set up. Let me paint you a picture. Early Saturday morning, the grass still wet with dew. Preston Whitfield, HOA President, standing at my property line in his signature blue fleece vest, the one he wore to every meeting like a uniform of authority. Behind him, their monstrosity. Custom stone pathways. Designer dog fountains that cost more than my truck. Agility courses with imported cedar equipment. Graved memorial benches sitting exactly where my father's apple trees used to stand. The smell of fresh mulch and pressure-treated. Lumber hung heavy in the air. Volunteers scrambled around setting up ribbon-cutting decorations. A local news van idled at the entrance. The city councilwoman's assistant was adjusting a podium getting ready for the big ceremony at 2:00 that afternoon, and Preston, he looked straight at me with that smug smile of his, still sulking. Danny, he tilted his head the way people do when they're about to say something they've been practicing. Your daddy dug a hole in the ground and called it heritage. The rest of us built a community. He paused, made sure I was listening. That little pond where you used to fish, it's gone. Just like him. Time to move on. I want you to understand something. That pond wasn't just a hole in the ground. That was the place my late father and I spent every Saturday morning of my entire childhood. We watched the sun come up together on that water. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just sat there in silence that felt safe and warm and like home. Preston had looked at the most sacred ground. I had left the place where I buried my father's ashes and called it a hole in the ground. He thought he'd won, but he didn't know what. I knew. Buried in my father's filing cabinet behind 30 years of tax returns and utility bills was a land use agreement from 1987. Signed by the county, legally binding. Never expired. Never revoked. It gave me the absolute right to restore my property to its original condition immediately, using whatever fill material I needed, without asking permission from anyone. In exactly 4 hours, 3 concrete trucks were going to pull up to that dog park, and every single inch of Preston Whitfield's grand opening was going to disappear under a river of concrete, all of it legal, all of it documented, all of it on camera. Stick around, because what happens? Destroyed him completely, and I did every bit of it by the book. But first, let me back up 9 months and tell you exactly how this nightmare started. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 49 years old. I'm a licensed county surveyor, and I inherited 1 acre of private land inside. A subdivision including a hand-dug pond that my father spent 3 weekends building in the summer of 1980. The summer I turned 5 years old, my dad, Robert Marsh, was a simple man. And I mean that in the best possible way. He worked the same job for 31 years, fixing roads for the county. He drove the same Ford truck for 19 years. Every workday he packed the same lunch, bologna sandwich, 1 apple, black coffee, and a silver thermos that made a specific metallic clink when he set it down on the truck hood. He wasn't fancy. He didn't want fancy things. He wanted his 1 acre of land, and the pond he built on it. My father bought that land in 1979, 1 year before I was born. It cost him $4,200, which was everything he and my mother had saved in 3 years of marriage. The subdivision was brand new back then. There was no HOA, no rules, just families buying little pieces of land and building modest homes. In the summer of 1980, when I was 5 years old, my dad decided to dig a pond. He did it himself. No machines, no contractors, just him and his neighbor Gerald. 2 shovels. Back to grown men. 6 long weekends of digging red clay out of the ground in the Tennessee summer heat. He hauled water from the creek half a mile down the road in 5-gallon buckets in the bed of his truck. He planted cattails along the south edge. Those tall plants that look like hot dogs on sticks. And on the north bank, he planted a weeping willow sapling that was no taller than me at the time. He stocked the pond with bluegill and bass from the county fish hatchery. 30 fish. All free because he worked for the county and they liked him. That pond became our place. Every Saturday morning before the sun was fully up, my dad and I would walk down to that water. He'd pour black coffee from his thermos. I'd put a worm on my hook very seriously, the way kids do when they want to look like they know what they're doing. The air smelled like water and mud and something green. Still can't name. But I'd recognize it anywhere. Some mornings we talked. Some mornings we didn't say a word. Just watched the bobber float on the surface. Listened to the birds waking up. Felt the cool air that sits on water right before the day gets hot. That silence felt safe. It felt like home. My dad died 15 months ago. Heart attack. He was 68. It happened fast. I scattered his ashes under that weeping willow tree on the north bank. The same tree he planted when I was 5 years old. It's taller than my house now. The branches sweep down so low, they touch the water. His old fishing rod is still hanging in my garage. I haven't been able to decide what to do with it yet. 2 days before he died, he was sitting up in his hospital bed. Still stubborn. Still himself. Tubes in his arms, but his voice steady. He grabbed my wrist, looked me right in the eye. "Danny, that land is yours. Don't let them take it. Don't sign anything. You hear me?" I promised him I wouldn't. I had no idea how important that promise was about to become. Preston Whitfield moved to our neighborhood 2 years. Before my father died, he came from a subdivision about 40 miles east, a place called Ridgemont. Estates. I didn't know much about why he left at the time, but I later learned there had been 2 unresolved property disputes there. 2 homeowners who accused him of manipulating boundary lines and pressuring elderly residents to sign over. Common areas, nothing was ever proven. No charges filed. He just moved, and he landed here. Preston became the HOA president the same month my dad's obituary appeared in the newspaper. I don't think that was a coincidence. He showed up at my front door on a Tuesday evening about 3. Weeks after the funeral, I remember because I was eating dinner alone for the first time in my life, and the knock startled me. It felt rude, like someone interrupting something private. Preston was in his early 50s. It's the kind of guy who worked out every day and made sure you knew it. He always wore the same outfit to HOA meetings, blue fleece vest over a white-collared shirt, every single time, like a costume. His hair was so neat, it looked scared to move. When he shook my hand, the gesture felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. He smelled like cedar wood cologne, expensive but fake underneath, the kind of smell that doesn't quite sit right. He smiled before he even said hello. "Daniel." He paused like he was genuinely sad. "I just want to say how sorry I am about your father." He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like someone reading the word sorry off a script. Robert was a real character around here. He said character the way people say it when they actually mean weird. Then he pulled out a folder. Clean white edges, official-looking HOA letterhead printed across the top. "The neighborhood's been talking," he said, opening the folder on my doorstep. "I think that pond area could become something the whole community enjoys together, living. Memorial to your father, a place where families can bring their dogs, let their kids play. Something Robert would have been proud of. It's private property," I said. He tilted his head slightly. "Well, actually the original subdivision. Paperwork from 1979 shows that parcel is shared green space, community property. I've got a copy of the map." "Right here. My father has a deed," I interrupted. "I have a deed. It's been filed with the county recorder's office for 45 years. You can drive down there right now and check it yourself if you want." Something changed in his face. The smile stayed, but something behind his eyes shifted. It's like a computer running a new set of calculations. He'd walked up to my door expecting to meet. Sad, exhausted man, too worn out from grief to fight back. He got something different. Grief makes people hold on too tight sometimes, he said slowly, in that voice adults use when they think they're explaining something to a child. "Your father would probably want his land to bring joy to the whole community, not just sit there unused. My father told me specifically not to sign anything I said, so I won't be signing anything. Good night, Preston." I closed the door. He stood on my porch for another 10 seconds. I could see his shadow through the frosted glass. Then he walked away. 3 days later, the first violation notice appeared on my mailbox. The first notice said I was in violation of HOA standards for excessive aquatic vegetation. That meant the cattails. The ones my dad planted in 1980. 44 years ago, the ticket came with a $300 fine. I had 10 days to remove the plants, or the fine would double. I took a photo of the notice, wrote down the date and time, put it in a folder. Then I paid exactly $0. Here's the thing about HOAs. They can only enforce rules on properties that signed their covenant. Laws vary by state, so check your local rules, but in Tennessee, where I live, no signed covenant meant no authority. Period. And my dad never signed anything Preston didn't know. I knew that 3 more tickets showed up over the next 2 weeks. One for unauthorized. Water featured the pond itself. One for unapproved landscaping my dad's blackberry bushes. One for unpermitted, structured the small wooden dock my father built. By hand, in 1989, the same dock where we sat together every Saturday morning for 20 years, every ticket had Preston Whitfield's signature at the bottom, big looping letters. The kind of signature that takes longer to write than it needs to, because nothing says power like fancy handwriting on fake tickets. I filed every single one in my folder and didn't pay a dime 2 weeks later. Preston tried something bigger. A thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. Certified mail. Official-looking county seal on the return address. Inside was what Preston claimed was the original. 1979 subdivision plat map. The legal document that shows how the land was divided when the neighborhood was first created. The paper was heavy. Expensive. It's a kind of stock you'd use for official documents. And on this map, my father's lot was labeled. Neighborhood green space, common area, not private property. Common area. Here's the thing. I'm a licensed county surveyor. I have been for 23 years. Reading plat maps and land surveys is what I do 40 hours a week. I can spot a fake property document the way a chef can spot spoiled meat, and this document smelled wrong. The seal was slightly off-center. The font didn't match other county documents from that era. The paper, even though it was thick and fancy, smelled like it came out of an inkjet. Printer last week? I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning. The clerk behind the desk was a woman named Phyllis Harmon. She'd been working there for 22 years. She had short gray hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the no-nonsense expression of someone who'd seen every document trick people try to pull. I showed her the map Preston had sent me. She held it up to the light, turned it over, set it down. Then she pulled the actual 1979 plat map from the county archives. The original file document sealed in a protective plastic sleeve with a hand-dated stamp from the county recorder on April 12th, 1979. On the real map, my father's lot was clearly marked Lot 17, private residential, parcel owner Robert E. Marsh. No mention of green space. No mention of common area. Phyllis looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "Mr. Marsh," she said quietly, "this document you brought in did not come from our office." I filed a formal complaint with the county that same afternoon. The harassment got more creative. Over the next month, anonymous phone calls started flooding every county government office. Someone called the Environmental Health Department claiming my pond was a mosquito breeding ground spreading disease. Someone called Animal Control saying I was keeping illegal exotic fish. Someone called Building Inspections, claiming my dock was unsafe and unpermitted. Each call meant an inspector had to visit my property. Inspector Nguyen from Environmental Health came out twice. Both times he found nothing wrong. The second time he stood on my driveway and said, "Mr. Marsh, your pond is healthier than most county wetlands I monitor. Whoever is calling us is wasting everyone's time." That week I installed 8 security cameras around my property, motion dash activated, night vision, cloud backup. I had a feeling I was going to need the footage. Now, if you think fake tickets and forged maps are bad, wait until you hear what Preston did next. Because this is the moment when annoying HOA president turned into actual criminal on. A Thursday morning in late April, a man knocked on my front door. His name was Victor Salinas. He ran a landscaping and construction company. He was probably in his mid-50s, wearing work boots and a company polo shirt. He had a clipboard under one arm and a rolled-up. a set of blueprints under the other, and he had the look on his face of someone who just realized something had gone very, very wrong. "Are you Daniel Marsh?" he asked. "I am. I think we need to talk." He unrolled the blueprints on my porch railing. What I saw made my stomach drop. Detailed construction plans for my property. Stamped concrete pathways cutting through my yard. Dog park equipment positioned exactly where my grass was. Covered pavilion where my father's apple trees used to stand, and right in the center of the page, where my father's pond currently sat. A flat filled-in area labeled decorative. Dry creek bed natural stone? "They were planning to fill in my father's pond, Mr. Salinas," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "Who hired you to do this work?" He checked his paperwork. "The Creekside Meadows HOA 3 weeks ago. Mr. Preston Whitfield is listed as the primary contact. Gave us a signed contract, a deposit check, and this." He pulled out a document from his clipboard, a deed transfer form. It claimed that Robert E. Marsh, my father, had transferred ownership of Lot 17 to the Creekside Meadows Homeowners Association in March of this year, 2 months ago, 4 months. After my father died, Preston Whitfield had forged a deed transfer document. He had created a legal paper claiming my father, a dead man, had signed over property he didn't own to an HOA. That had no claim to it. Let me say that again in plain language. Preston had faked a government document to steal my family's land, Mr. Salinas, I said carefully. I am the legal owner of this property. My father passed away 15 months ago. He never transferred this land to anyone. The document is a forgery. Victor Salinas is a good man. He's an honest man. He folded up his blueprints right there on my porch, put them back under his arm, and apologized twice. "Mr. Marsh, I'm sorry. We do our due diligence, but if someone brings us a deed and a signed contract, we assume it's legitimate. I'm pulling my crew off this job immediately." He left. I stood at my front door for a long time after his truck pulled away. Preston wasn't just harassing me with fake tickets anymore. He had committed fraud. Faking a property deed transfer is a crime. Not a civil dispute, not an HOA disagreement. Felony. I called my attorney that same afternoon. Carol Assay had been my family's property attorney for 8 years. She was sharp, thorough, and didn't waste words. I explained everything that had happened. The fake tickets, the forged map, the deed transfer. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said very calmly, with the specific tone of a lawyer who knows she has a solid case, "Daniel, what you're describing is organized property fraud. This isn't HOA overreach. This is criminal. I'm calling the county attorney's office tonight." 4 days later, they tried again. Monday morning, 7:15 a.m. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the sound of heavy equipment on my street. I walked. OUTSIDEA, Bobcat excavator. A dump truck. 5 workers in hard hats and reflective vests standing around with shovels and equipment. I walked up to the crew, introduced myself to the foreman, a man named Carter. "Good morning," I said. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" He showed me a work order, according to his paperwork. He had a valid building permit to begin construction of a community dog park on Lot 17. Start date today, and at the bottom of the permit on the line that said, "Property owner's signature," was my name. My signature. Except I had never signed that permit. I've been signing my name on official county survey documents for 23 years. I know every loop, every angle, every stroke of my own signature, the way a musician knows their favorite song. The D at the beginning was too neat. The loop on the M was going the wrong direction. And my professional surveyor license number, which I include on every document I sign, was wrong by 2 digits. Someone had practiced my signature and gotten it almost right. "Almost, Mr. Carter," I said quietly. "I did not sign this permit. Someone forged my name on a government document. It's a felony." Carter stopped the crew immediately. Not a single piece of equipment moved. 14 minutes later, Preston Whitfield pulled up in his car. Blue fleece vest. Pressed khakis. The smile, he walked right up to me like he owned the place. "Daniel, these men have a job to do. Your cooperation is legally required under the Community Improvement Covenant." I held up the permit. "Preston, you forged my signature on a government building permit. That is document fraud. That is a crime. I've already contacted my attorney in the county." For exactly 2 seconds, the smile stopped working. Then he said, and I'm not making this up, "Permit processing sometimes requires representative consent. Documentation for unresponsive property owners. Standard administrative procedure in cases where community health and safety are at stake." He actually said that. I laughed. I genuinely could not help it. "Preston," I said, "you can explain your administrative procedures to a judge. These men are leaving. And if you step 1 foot onto my property, I'm calling the Sheriff Carter and his crew," packed up and left. Within 20 minutes, Preston stood in my driveway for a long moment staring at me. Then he got in his car and drove away. But before he left, Carter walked over to me and lowered his voice. "Mr. Marsh, I've been in construction for 23 years. This whole job felt wrong from day one. The HOA president paid our deposit in cash. No paper trail. He changed the project plans 4 times in 6 weeks. Kept saying we needed to move faster." He paused. "And last week he told my project manager we needed to get that pond filled in before any legal challenges could be filed." Those were his exact words. Let that sink in. Preston knew I had legitimate ownership. He knew I could fight him in court. So he was trying to destroy the pond fast enough that it would already be gone before I could stop him legally. Because here's the thing about property destruction. If someone bulldozes your pond before a judge can issue a protection order, the judge can only make them pay you money. You can't unfill a pond. You can't bring back a weeping willow tree. Preston was trying to create facts on the ground that no court could undo. That evening, Carol Assay called me back. "Daniel, I spoke with the county attorney's office. They're opening a formal fraud investigation. They want copies of everything. The forged deed, the fake permit, all of it." She paused. "This man is going down. But you need to be prepared. People like this don't stop when they're cornered. They escalate." She was right. What Preston did next was so brazen, so unbelievably arrogant that when I saw it, I actually had to sit down because he didn't just try to take my property, he tried to sell it. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table going through my father's old files when I decided to search my property address online. Just out of curiosity, I wish I could describe the feeling when the page loaded. A real estate listing for my property. Photos of my pond, my yard, my father's weeping willow tree, the tree where I scattered his ashes with a caption underneath that said, "Mature natural feature scheduled for removal." During site development, scheduled for removal, they were going to cut down the tree where my father was buried. The listing description said the property was HOA-owned land conversion underway and described it as a shovel-ready green space available. For commercial or community development, asking price $127,000. Preston Whitfield, selling my property on the internet. While I was sitting in my house 30 feet away from where the listing said vacant land was located. I took screenshots of every single page, every photo, every word of the description. I sent them all to Carol Assay. I filed complaints with the state licensing board, the county attorney, and the county recorder's office. Carol called me back within 2 hours. "Daniel, I've seen some bold fraud in my career, but this is extraordinary. The real estate board is already investigating." She paused. Asterisk and Daniel, this confirms what we suspected. They found 2 other properties in this county that Preston listed for sale without the owner's permission. Same pattern. Elderly homeowners. Properties with unclear documentation. He's been doing this for years. 2 other properties, the rumors about Ridgemont Estates weren't just rumors. Preston Whitfield wasn't an opportunist who saw my grief as weakness. He was a predator. And I wasn't his first victim. 3 weeks before the dog park grand opening was scheduled, Preston got desperate. He wrote a letter, printed it on official HOA letterhead, and personally delivered it to every single house in the neighborhood. No, because one of my neighbors, a retired school teacher named Margaret, brought her copy to my door that same evening. She was angry, the letter said. I was an uncooperative property owner who was preventing essential neighborhood improvements due to personal psychological issues. Stemming from unresolved grief, he told my neighbors people I'd known for years people. I saw at the grocery store and waved to when I mowed my lawn that I was blocking the dog park because I was too mentally unstable from my father's death to think. Clearly, he put that in writing. He turned my grief into a weapon. Let me be very clear about something. Grief is real. Mental health struggles are real, and there is no shame in needing help when you're hurting. But what Preston did, taking something real and painful and twisting it into a tool to discredit me to make my neighbors think I was irrational, that's not concerned. It's cruelty. And it's the kind of thing that makes people afraid to be honest about their pain, because they've seen it used against someone else. Margaret stood on my porch with that letter in her hand and said, Danny, I've known you since you were 12 years old. This is garbage. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Turns out a lot of my neighbors didn't buy what Preston was selling. But some did. And that hurt. My security cameras caught what happened. Next, 1:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. A figure in dark clothes moving along my southern fence line with a flashlight. I pulled up the footage on my phone from bed. Preston Whitfield. Somehow still wearing the blue fleece vest even at 2 a.m. He was carrying a small sledgehammer and metal survey stakes. For 31 minutes he moved along my property line, pounding stakes into the ground, new property markers, 18 inches inside my actual legal boundary. He was physically trying to move where my property began. If those stakes stayed there long enough, if they looked official enough, he could later claim that the accepted property line had always been where his stakes were. It's called adverse possession, and in some states, if you occupy someone else's land openly for long enough, you can actually claim legal ownership of it. Preston left 3 stakes in the ground. He also left his flashlight, dropped it right there. In the grass, when a dog barked 2 houses down and he spooked. The next morning, I went out with my professional GPS survey equipment, the kind that's accurate to within 2 inches, and I measured and photographed every single stake. Then I drove to the county sheriff's office with the security footage, the photographs, and Preston's flashlight in a plastic bag. Now, most people in my situation would be feeling pretty helpless at this point. Fake tickets, forged deeds, a smear campaign, midnight property theft, and if I'm being honest, I was starting to feel worn down. But then something happened that changed everything. A knock on my door on a Friday evening, and the person standing there was about to hand me the keys to Preston's entire operation. Her name was Sandra Kowalski. She'd been the HOA treasurer for 7 years. Quiet, organized, the kind of person who kept perfect records and never made a scene. She stood on my porch with a folder in her hands and fear in her eyes. Daniel, she said, can I come in? I need to show you something. And I can't stay quiet about it anymore. We sat at my kitchen table. Asterisk. She opened the folder and spread out bank statements, receipts, and credit card records. Preston has been stealing from the HOA, she said. Her hands were shaking slightly. For at least 2 years, she walked me through it. The dog park project, all the custom stonework, imported cedar equipment the designer fountains had cost. $47,000 Preston had paid for it using the HOA's emergency reserve fund. Money that 52 neighborhood families had been contributing to for years. $150 per household per month to cover urgent repairs, broken water mains, fallen trees, real emergencies. He never asked the board for approval. He just spent it. But that wasn't all. Sandra showed me the HOA credit card statements. Preston had been using the card to pay for his personal car payment. $480 a month is home, internet, and cell phone bills, dinners at expensive restaurants, and a weekend. Trip to Gatlinburg with someone named Rachel, who was definitely not his wife. All told over $34,000 in unauthorized personal expenses, paid For with money that belonged to the neighborhood, the emergency fund is almost empty, Sandra said. If something actually happens, if the main road floods, if a retaining wall collapses, we have nothing left. She slid a final piece of paper across the table. I already sent copies of everything to the state HOA Oversight Board. But I wanted you to see it too, because the money he's using to build on your property was stolen from the same neighbors he. Convinced to support him, I looked at the documents spread across my kitchen table. Sandra, I said. Thank you. I know this wasn't easy. She nodded. Your father was a good man, Danny. He helped my husband fix our porch steps one summer when we didn't have money to hire someone. Didn't ask for anything in return. Did it because that's who he was. Her voice cracked a little. Preston Whitfield is not a good man. I'm done pretending he is. After she left, I sat in that kitchen for a long time. I called Carol, and told her everything, and then I remembered something. 3 weeks. Earlier, I'd been going through my father's home office, and I'd found something in his filing cabinet that I hadn't fully understood at the time, but now it made perfect sense, and now I knew exactly what it was going to do. I'd been putting off cleaning out my father's office. It still smelled like him. Old paper. The faint scent of motor oil that lived in his hands from 40 years of county road work. Dust and sunlight and silence. His filing cabinet sat in the corner. 4 drawers, olive green metal, older than I was. My dad kept records of everything, every receipt, every warranty. Every piece of paper that came through his mailbox since 1971. Month. Year topic. All labeled in his careful block handwriting. On a quiet Sunday in November, I finally sat down and started going through it. 3rd drawer from the bottom. Behind a folder labeled County Work 1985199OA. Plain yellow envelope. Metal clasp. Sealed and on the front in my father's handwriting. Pond important. Do not die a Sayard. My dad underlined things when he really meant them. He had underlined all 3 words. I opened the envelope. Inside was a document I'd never seen before. 8 pages. Dated September 14th, 1987. Signed by my father, Robert E. Marsh. Countersigned by the county planning director, the county attorney. Stamped and officially filed with the county recorder's office. The title read, Perpetual Land Use Easement Agreement, Drainage Compensation. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood. Here's what it said in plain language. In 1987, the county needed to install a new stormwater drainage system through our neighborhood. The main drainage line needed to cut across the corner of my father's property just a small section. It's maybe 15 feet. My father said okay, but he negotiated something in return. A perpetual land use easement that gave him and his heirs meaning. Me the permanent, irrevocable right to alter, restore, modify, or fill his property for any reason at any time using any materials, without requiring additional permits or approvals from any government or private entity. The agreement specifically stated no subsequent covenants. Homeowner association, rules, municipal ordinances, or third-party agreements shall supersede or limit the rights granted herein. In other words, my father had traded 15 feet of drainage access for the permanent right to do whatever he wanted. With his land, forever, without asking anyone's permission? Asterisk. The document had been filed with the county in 1987. It had never been amended. It never revoked. Never challenged. It was still completely legally valid. I sat back in my father's old chair. Sunlight was coming through the window blinds and stripes across the wooden floor. I looked at the envelope, at his handwriting. Pond important, do not discard. He knew. He'd fought for this agreement 37 years ago. He'd filed it correctly. He'd labeled it clearly. And then he'd trusted that someday when it mattered, his son would find it. The man who packed bologna sandwiches for 31 years and drove the same truck until the odometer stopped working had quietly, carefully, and completely, legally made sure his land could never be taken from him. I thought about what he said in the hospital. Don't let them take it. Don't sign anything. He always knew what he was doing. The next morning, I drove to the county planning office. I brought copies of every page of the 1987 agreement. The planning coordinator was a woman named Patricia Donovan. She'd worked for the county for 19 years. She was meticulous, precise, and took accuracy seriously. She pulled the original filing from the archives, compared it to my copies page by page, checked the signatures, verified the dates. Then she looked up at me, Mr. Marsh. This agreement is completely valid. It's never been modified or revoked. Your land use rights under this document are fully active. She paused. What are you planning to do? I told her I was considering a land restoration project, restoring the surface of my property back to its original state. I was thinking about scheduling it for the same Saturday as a certain community event. She looked at me with a very calm, very neutral expression. You don't need a permit for that work under this agreement, she said, but I'd strongly recommend filing a formal notice of intent with our office. That way everything is properly documented through official channels. I'll have the paperwork to you by Thursday, I said. As I was leaving, she said one more thing. Mr. Marsh, your father filed this correctly in 1987. Not everyone would have known to do that. He knew exactly what he was doing. Yes, I said. He usually did. Over the next 2 weeks, so I made 5 phone calls. I assembled a team, and every single person I called said the same thing. I've been waiting my whole career to see something like this happen, because sometimes, not often, but sometimes the person with the clipboard and the fake smile and the forged documents runs into someone who actually knows their rights. And when that happens, everything changes. Marcus was my old work partner from my surveying days. Retired now, but still licensed. 29 years of reading land records and watching property owners get pushed around by people who knew how to weaponize paperwork. Danny, he said when I finished explaining. Want me to witness what exactly, eh? Legal land restoration operation on my own property? Fully authorized by a 1987 county easement? I just need a professional surveyor there to document that everything's done correctly. By the book? There was a pause. I heard him set down his coffee mug. Brother, he said slowly, after 30 years of watching people with money and connections steamroll regular folks who don't know their rights, I would consider it a genuine honor to be standing there when it finally goes the other way. Another pause. What time? Saturday. Patricia, at the county planning office, had already prepared the official restoration authorization paperwork before I even called. Mr. Marsh, I'd like to be present as the official county witness, she said. This easement is one of only 3 like it still active in our county. People need to understand these agreements exist. I've also drafted a memo for my supervisor explaining the legal background. She paused. I'll be there Saturday morning. o'clock. Carol, my attorney, had news. The county attorney's office has been building a case against Preston Whitfield for 6 weeks, she said. The forged permit, the fake deed transfer, Sandra's financial records, the fraudulent real estate listings. They're ready to move? I just need you to pick the date. Saturday, I said. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, there was a brief silence. Then Daniel. That's bold. But given what he's done to you and to those other property owners, I think it's justified. I'll notify the county attorney tonight. Kevin ran a concrete and materials company 2 counties over. No relation to me, despite us sharing part of a last name, which he thought was hilarious. I explained what I needed. He called back 4 hours later. I've got 3 trucks available Saturday, my attorney reviewed the 1987 easement agreement and confirmed the work is fully authorized. No permits required. No variances needed. He paused. Mr. Marsh, I've wanted to do a job exactly like this my entire career. We'll be there. Linda was the editor of the Tennyson County Register, the local weekly newspaper. She'd been covering property rights in local government for 38 years. She'd already heard about my situation from someone at the planning office. She called me before I could call her. Mr. Marsh, I want to cover this. Pre-covenant property rights are critically important, and our readers deserve to understand how these old agreements work and why they matter. Saturday morning, I said. 8 o'clock. Wear boots, you don't mind getting dirty. Over the next few days, Marcus and I walked the property every evening. We placed official survey markers around the restoration area, documented every inch of the HOA's dog park construction with photographs and GPS coordinates. Made sure the weeping willow on the north bank, the tree where my father rests, was clearly marked with orange. Safety flag so it wouldn't be touched. HOA had installed $47,000 worth of equipment on my land, using money stolen from their own neighbors and a deed transfer document that was fake. Every piece of it was about to disappear in those final days. Preston tried everything he had left. He called an emergency neighborhood meeting and called my restoration plan. Environmental aggression and an attack on community values. He filed emergency paperwork with a judge trying to get an injunction to stop me. It was denied in 48 hours. The judge noted that Preston had provided no evidence of ownership and that my 1987 easement was legally sound. Preston sent a threatening letter to Patricia Donovan at the county planning office claiming she was engaging in conspiracy to commit property destruction. Patricia had been doing her job for 19 years. She'd received threatening letters before. She wrote back a formal 2-sentence response citing the 1987 agreement, attaching a copy of the filed easement and wishing him a pleasant day. Friday evening, the day before Marcus and I walked the property one last time. The dog park equipment was all still there. Agility stations, decorative fountains, engraved memorial benches sitting where my father's apple trees used to grow. But the weeping willow was untouched. Its branches hung low over the water, moving gently in the evening breeze, the same way they'd moved every Saturday morning when I was a boy. I put my hand on the bark for a moment. Just for a moment. Tomorrow, Marcus said quietly. Tomorrow, I said. Saturday was going to be perfect weather. Saturday morning was cold and clear. The sky was bright blue all the way across. Not a single cloud. Kind of morning my dad would have called a good day for the pond. By 8:45 a.m., the HOA volunteers were already at the dog park entrance, setting up for the grand opening ceremony. Red ribbons stretched across the fancy stone pathway, podium with the neighborhood logo. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows. The city councilwoman's assistant was setting up a flower arrangement on the welcome table. A local TV news crew was positioning cameras along the fence. Preston Whitfield stood at the entrance, greeting early arrivals. Blue fleece vest, pressed khakis, big smile. The relaxed posture of a man who thought he'd already won. At 7:50 a.m., 3 concrete mixer trucks idled on the public street at my property line. Not on anyone's land, not blocking anything. Just sitting there, completely legal engines, rumbling with that low, heavy sound that travels far in the quiet morning. At 8 a.m., I stood at my property line. With me, Marcus Tillman, licensed surveyor, clipboard in hand. Patricia Donovan, county planning coordinator, holding the official restoration authorization. Deputy Sheriff Andrews, who'd read the fraud case file and specifically asked to be present. Linda Torres and her photographer from the register. At 8 to 10, I called Preston's cell phone. He answered on the second ring. Preston, this is Daniel Marsh. I'm standing at my property line right now. I'm about to begin authorized land restoration under the 1987 county easement agreement. File number 874412. This work is fully legal and has been approved by the county planning office. You have 15 minutes to remove anything personal from the area. Silence on the other end. Then Daniel, you can't possibly. 15 minutes, Preston. I hung up. At 8:22. Marcus walked to the volunteer coordinator at the entrance and handed them a formal written notice signed by Patricia Donovan as the official county witness. At 8:33, Preston came across the parking lot toward me. Not quite running, but close. Blue fleece vest flapping, face red. Cedar cologne arriving 3 steps before he did. Daniel, this is illegal. I filed for an injunction. Can't. The injunction was denied, I said calmly. I handed him the court document. The 1987 easement gives me permanent land use rights. The county has authorized this restoration. Deputy Andrews is here to ensure the work proceeds without interference. Preston looked at Deputy Andrews. Deputy. Andrews looked back at Preston with the flat, measured expression of someone who has read a detailed fraud file and formed very specific opinions. "Mr. Whitfield," Deputy Andrews said, "I'd recommend stepping back behind the property line. At 8:47, the first concrete truck rolled onto my property. The sound is hard to describe. Heavy, slow, certain. The sound of something that has made up its mind." Asterisk, the first pour started at the far north corner, well away from the weeping willow that had marked with safety flags the night before. Gray concrete flowed thick and smooth across the decorative stone pathways, then over the agility course equipment. The imported cedar beams that Sandra's records showed cost $6,400. Then across the designer dog fountains, $3,800 each. 3 of them. Disappearing one by one under the slow heavy tide, someone at the folding chairs shouted, "What is that? What are they doing over there?" Preston's voice rose above the crowd. "This is illegal. This man is destroying community property. Somebody call the police." Deputy Andrews was already on his radio. "This is Unit 7 at Creekside Commons. We have an authorized land restoration operation in progress on private property. No emergency. Everything is under control." The second truck began pouring along the eastern edge. That's when the first crack appeared. The fancy stamped concrete pathways, the ones Preston had installed over soft, uncompacted soil because he was in such a hurry, weren't designed to handle the weight of fresh concrete being poured on top of them. The foundation hadn't been done properly. No gravel base, no proper drainage. It cut corners everywhere to get this park built fast enough to steal my property, and now those corners were cutting back at 9:14 a.m. The main walkway gave way. It didn't crumble, it collapsed. A 15-foot section of decorative stonework buckled downward, caving into a sinkhole that opened up where the old creek bed used to run. The creek bed my father had warned the subdivision about 40 years ago. The sound was incredible, grinding, cracking. It's a deep groan of stone breaking under its own weight. The covered pavilion, the one they'd built, where my father's apple trees used to stand, tilted sideways as the ground shifted beneath it. 3 of the memorial benches slid toward the sinkhole like they were on a tilting ship deck. The TV camera swung around to capture it all. Volunteers screamed and ran back from the collapsing section. The city councilwoman's assistant dropped her flower arrangement and sprinted toward the parking lot. One of the designer dog fountains, the $3,800 one, with the copper basin and the engraved plaques, tipped forward and rolled into the sinkhole like a boulder down a hillside. It disappeared into the gap with a crash that echoed across the whole neighborhood. Preston stood frozen at the edge of the chaos for maybe 5 seconds. Nobody moved. Then the second sinkhole opened. This one was on the north side, closer to where they'd tried to install the underground irrigation system. The system that was never properly connected to anything because, again, Preston was in too much of a hurry. A 12-foot circle of decorative mulch and imported cedar chips just dropped, like the ground had swallowed it. The Agility Course 3. Stations custom-built, imported from a company in Oregon, went with it. Cedar beams snapping, metal joints shrieking, the whole structure folding in on itself like a crushed cardboard. Box. The volunteers weren't setting up chairs anymore. They were running at 9:23 a.m. The concrete trucks stopped pouring. They didn't need to continue. The park was destroying itself. $40,000-$7,000 of stolen money, custom stonework, imported equipment, designer fountains, engraved memorial benches, all of it sliding, cracking, collapsing into sinkholes that Preston's rushed fraudulent construction had created. Marcus stood beside me with his clipboard documenting everything. "Danny," he said quietly, "this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Linda Torres's photographer was firing off shots as fast as his camera could click, and that's when Detective Maria Ramos from the County Criminal Investigations Unit walked across the parking lot. 2 uniformed officers beside her, a folder of documents in her hand. Preston was standing at the edge of the first sinkhole staring into the hole, where his fountain used to be when she approached him. Preston Whitfield, asterisk. He turned. His face was pale. The smile was gone. Now the blue fleece vest had concrete dust on the shoulder. "I have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with property fraud, forgery of government, documents theft by deception, and criminal misuse of homeowner association funds. He didn't scream this time. He didn't threaten anyone. He just stood there looking at the destruction all around him, the destruction his own shortcuts and lies had created, and said nothing. Detective Ramos put the handcuffs on while the cameras rolled. As they walked Preston toward the patrol car, he turned around one last time. His eyes found mine. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then he said very quietly, "This isn't over." I looked at the sick show. At the collapsed pavilion, at the broken fountains and the shattered benches and the pavement, destroyed pathways, all of it built on stolen money and forged documents and land that was never his. And behind all of it, untouched, my father's weeping willow stood exactly where it had always stood. Branches moving slow and easy in the morning breeze, the same way they moved every Saturday morning when I was 7 years old, sitting on a handmade dock with a fishing rod and my father beside me. I looked at Preston. "Preston, I said my dad dug that pond by hand in 1980, and it outlasted everything you tried to build on top of it." I turned and walked back to the willow tree. 7 months later, Preston Whitfield stood in front of a judge and entered a guilty plea. The final charges: 2 counts of forgery of government documents, 1 count of property fraud, 3 counts of theft by deception, 4 counts of criminal misuse of association funds, and 1 count of reckless endangerment for the collapsed construction. The judge was not sympathetic. She noted that Preston had victimized multiple property owners across 2 counties, that he had stolen from the very neighbors who trusted him, that his rushed, unsafe construction had created sinkholes that could have injured or killed the volunteers and families who showed up for his ribbon-cutting ceremony. She sentenced him to 5 years in state prison. No possibility of early release for the first 3 years. He was ordered to pay full restitution. $47,000 to the HOA for the stolen emergency fund, $34,000 in personal expenses he had, charged to the neighborhood credit card, and $1 to $7 note in damages to me and the 2 other property owners whose land he had fraudulently listed for sale. His real estate license was permanently revoked. As they led him out of the courtroom, he looked back at me one more time. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. 6 weeks after sentencing, his house went up for sale. I heard he has family somewhere in Nevada. I don't know where exactly. I don't really care. The HOA voted to dissolve itself 2 months after Preston's arrest. A full financial audit confirmed every number Sandra had shown me. Most of the board members had been lied to. They genuinely didn't know what Preston was doing and faced no charges. Several of them came to my door over the following weeks to apologize. I shook every hand. I meant it every time. Sandra Kowalski was appointed to oversee the dissolution process. She made sure every remaining dollar in the HOA accounts was returned fairly to the families who'd paid into it. When it was all done, she sent me a card. It said 4 words. "Your father would be proud." I filed it in his cabinet, in the folder marked "Pond Important." The next spring, I rebuilt my father's pond. The county sent engineers to assess the sinkhole damage. They determined that the unstable ground Preston had built on was actually an old, unmapped creek bed, exactly what my father had warned the original developers about in 1979. The sinkholes were filled properly with engineered fill and proper compaction. The county paid for most of it as part of a drainage remediation project. And when they were done, at a blank canvas where the dog park used to be, I rebuilt the pond the same way my father built it, not with machines. Just careful work and hand tools and time. I used his original notes to get the dimensions right. I brought in clay from the same creek he used. I got bluegill and bass from the county fish hatchery. I replanted cattails along the southern edge from roots I'd carefully saved, and the weeping willow on the north bank, the tree where my father rests, had never needed any help from me at all. It was already exactly what it had always been. The County Historical Preservation Society helped me register the property as the Robert Marsh Heritage Pond. After Linda Torres's newspaper article came out, people started paying attention to old easement agreements like my father's 1987 document. The county planning office now uses it in training for new employees. They learn to look for agreements like it when someone's property rights are being threatened. My dad would have been quietly proud of that. He believed in doing things correctly. He believed in keeping good records. He believed that if you did the work right, the paperwork would protect you when you needed it. He was right on. Quiet Saturday mornings, I still go sit at that water. I bring his old silver thermos sometimes. Black coffee. No sugar. The way he made it. I sit on the dock, the same dock he built in 1989, which I repaired and refinished last summer, and I watch the bluegill move slow through the sparrows. The cattails bend in the breeze. The willow tree does what willow trees do. It grows, it holds, it stays. Sometimes I see the bobber floating still on the surface, and I'm 7 years old again, and my father is. Beside me, and the whole world is quiet and safe. That's enough. That's everything. I kept my promise, Dad. If you just spent the last 50 minutes watching a man use a 37-year-old document his father filed in a county office, tucked in a yellow envelope labeled important in the back of a filing cabinet to legally watch a corrupt HOA president's stolen dog park collapse into sinkholes of his own making, while news cameras rolled and handcuffs clicked, you're in the right place. This channel exists for one reason, because regular people with regular homes and regular families deserve to know their rights, because the people who use fake signatures and forged deeds and stolen money to take what doesn't belong to them need to be stopped. Legally, publicly, with the paperwork their victims' fathers left behind in the third drawer from the bottom. If this story resonated with you, if you thought about your own property, your own family, your own promise made to someone you lost, hit the like button right now. It takes 2 seconds. It tells us that stories like Daniel's matter. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now. We publish 2 full stories every week. Real cases, real fights. The moment when the person being pushed around opens. The right drawer finds the right document, and everything changes. Ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. We've got a story coming in 4 days, eh? Grandmother discovered her HOA had been charging her a monthly maintenance fee for 11 years for a community mailbox shelter. The shelter burned down in 2011. She asked for 11 years of refunds. They said no. She found the original construction contract in her late husband's files with a clause they'd apparently forgotten about. The emergency board meeting that followed had to be ended early. You need to see what happened. We'll drop the link in the description the moment it goes live, and if you know someone right now dealing with their own Preston Whitfield, someone with a fake smile and a clipboard, and documents that don't smell right, send them this video. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is an old yellow envelope, labeled important by a father who knew his son would find it when he needed it most. We'll see you in 4 days.